I said those words to a young woman standing in my hall with snow still melting on the shoulders of a coat too thin for the moors, and I meant them to be cruel. I was very good in those years at being cruel. It was the only warmth I had left, and even it was cold. She did not flinch. That was the first thing about her that I could not forgive, and the first thing I could not forget. Every other soul at Wolvermere had learned to lower their eyes when I spoke that way, my steward, my grooms, the girls who lit the fires and fled the rooms before I entered them. But Miss Clara Fenwick only looked at me quietly, the way one looks at a man who is bleeding and does not know it, and she said, "As you wish, your grace." And then she went upstairs, and, God help me, she did as she wished instead. But I am ahead of myself. A man telling the story of how he was thought ought to begin with the winter, and my winter had lasted 7 years. So let me begin there in the cold, because the cold is where I lived, and the cold is what she walked into. 7 winters before that night, my wife had died. I will not dress it in poetry. There is none to be had. Eleanor took a fever in the December dark and was gone before the new year, and she left me a daughter 3 years old and a house I could no longer bear the sight of. Wolvermere had been full of her. I mean that as plainly as it can be meant. There was no corner of that great house on the northern moors that did not carry the print of her. Her laugh lived in the long gallery. Her music lived at the pianoforte in the morning room, where she played every evening until the candles guttered. And Christmas lived in the whole of it, because Eleanor loved Christmas the way some people love a person. From the first of Advent she wound greenery along every banister with her own hands, holly and ivy and trailing bay, until the hall smelled of pine and beeswax, and the particular sweetness of oranges studded with clove. She kept the old feast for the tenants in the great hall as her husband's fathers had kept it for 100 years, ale and firelight and the old songs, the doors thrown open to every soul on the estate, the poorest cottager as welcome at that hearth as any lord. She said a house was only as warm as its darkest week, and she made ours blaze. So when she died in that darkest week, I put out the blaze. I did it deliberately, and I did it thoroughly, and I told myself it was grief when it was closer to revenge. The only revenge left to a man against a world that had reached into his house and taken the best thing in it. I ordered the greenery burned. I had the pianoforte covered and its lid locked and the key given to me, and I kept that key in a drawer of my study for 7 years and never once looked at it without wanting to break something. I forbade the carols. I forbade the candles that Eleanor had loved to set burning in every window against the dark. I forbade the feast, and I shut the great hall, and I sent the tenants home in the snow that first December with a curt word and no explanation, and I did not open those doors to them again. The village called me the sorrowing Duke, and they were kind to call it sorrow. It was closer to a slow and dignified rage, and it had frozen everything it touched. I froze the servants, who learned to move through the house like ghosts and to speak to me only when spoken to. I froze the estate, running it by ledger and letter and rarely a human word. And chief among the things I froze, though I did not let myself see it for years, I froze my own daughter. Grace was 10 years old that winter, and I could not have told you the sound of her voice because I had not truly heard it in years. She had been a bright, chattering, sunlit little thing at 3, Eleanor's child through and through, forever singing, forever underfoot, forever asking why the sky was the color it was, and where the swallows went in winter. And then her mother was carried out under a sheet, and something in the child closed like a shutter, and it never opened again. She did not weep or rage or ask for what she had lost. She simply went quiet, a soft, watchful, unbearable quiet. She grew into a grave and silent girl who kept to the schoolroom and the nursery stair, who curtsied when she passed me and lowered her eyes as the servants did, and who, I know this now, I did not let myself know it then, was as motherless in her father's house as any orphan in a poorhouse, because her father had buried himself alive beside his wife and left her to raise herself in the cold. I told myself she was merely grave. Grave children exist. I had been one myself. And I let governess after governess come and go, 5 of them, I think, in 7 years, though I could not now put a name to any but the last, because Wolvermere in those years was no place for anyone with warmth in her, and warmth is the one thing a good governess must have. They came, and they found a silent child and a frozen master, and a house where Christmas was a forbidden word, and they did their duty for a season and fled to gentler places, and I let them go without a thought, because I had made a virtue of feeling nothing, and I was very accomplished at it. I engaged Miss Fenwick's sight unseen, on the recommendation of my late wife's aunt, Lady Marbury, who wrote to me twice a year out of a sense of duty to a leaner's memory, and whom I answered as briefly as courtesy allowed. Her letter said the girl was a parson's daughter, lately orphaned, poor, and in need of a place, and I confess the words that moved me to say yes were poor and in need, because I took them to mean she would be grateful, and grateful people are quiet, and quiet was the only quality I any longer asked of the living. I did not trouble to read further. I did not trouble to meet her coach. I heard it come rattling up the long drive through the December dark, the wheels crunching on frozen snow, and I stood in the hall out of some dim, half-buried sense of duty, the ghost of the host I had once been, and when she came through the door I told her, before she had so much as set down her single shabby portmanteau, that there would be no Christmas here. I have told you she did not flinch. Let me tell you now what she looked like, because I have never in all the years since stopped seeing it. She was not a beauty in the way the drawing-rooms of London reckon beauty, and I, who had been reckoned one of the great matches of my generation before I made myself a hermit, knew the London measure well. She was 25, perhaps, of no more than middling height, with a plain grey travelling gown gone soft and thin at the cuffs, and a good deal mended at the hem. Her half-boots were worn nearly through. Her brown hair had been neatly pinned that morning and undone by the wind of the last cold miles, so that a few strands lay loose against a cheek the frost had reddened. She had nothing about her of fashion, nothing of wealth, nothing that the world I had abandoned would have paused to look at twice. But she had a stillness, and she had a pair of steady gray eyes that moved once slowly over the whole shuttered morning hall, the mirrors shrouded in holland cloth, the furniture under its dust sheets like so many sleeping figures, the great cold hearth with no fire laid in it and no fire laid in it these 7 years. And those eyes did not fill with the pity I could have borne, nor with the fear I had come to expect, but with something else entirely. Something that looked, absurdly, in a penniless girl, standing alone in a great cold house before a man 3 counties feared, like resolve. "I understand there is a young lady I am to teach," she said. "There is. Then I should like to meet her, your grace, if you'll permit it. The rest we may settle as we go." The rest? As though a house without Christmas, without music, without so much as a single candle in a single window in the darkest week of the year, were a small matter to be settled as one went along, like the hour of a lesson or the ordering of books. I ought to have dismissed her on the spot for that alone. Instead, I found I had no answer ready, which had not happened to me in 7 years, and I turned on my heel and told my housekeeper, Mrs. Hartley, to take her up, and I retreated to my study and my brandy, and told myself I would be rid of her by 12th night, as I had been rid of all the others. I was not rid of her by 12th night. By 12th night I was a different man, though I did not yet know it, and it had begun that very first night with a single candle where I had ordered darkness. I came upon it by accident. I kept late hours in those years. The nights were the worst of it, the long black hours when the house was still and there was nothing between me and the empty place at my side, and I filled them with brandy and estate ledgers and the particular, familiar company of my own bitterness. It was near midnight, and I was crossing the upper landing on my way to rooms I dreaded, when I saw light bleeding from beneath the schoolroom door. A single small flame, and around it 2 voices low. I stopped with my hand on the latch. One voice I did not know, Miss Fenwick's, warm and even, the words too soft to make out, and the other was Grace's. I had not heard my daughter speak above a whisper in years. I had not heard her speak to anyone, unbidden, since I could remember. And here she was, on her very first night with a stranger, a woman she had known for the space of an evening, saying something at length, easily, the way a child speaks when a child feels safe. And then I gripped the iron latch so hard it bit into my palm. Then she laughed. A small laugh, rusty, the laugh of a child who has half forgotten the shape of laughing and is surprised to find her mouth still knows how. But a laugh, unmistakable, my daughter's laugh, the first I had heard in the 7 years since her mother died. I could have opened the door. I have asked myself 10,000 times in the years since why I did not, and I think the truth, the coward's truth, is this: that if I opened that door and my silent grave daughter looked up and saw my face, the face of the man who had darkened the house, who had burned the greenery and locked the music away and forbidden the very word Christmas, the shutter would come down again, and the small rusty laugh would stop, and the light would go out, because I was the winter. I had made myself the winter, and you do not carry a candle to a child by walking in as the dark. So I stood in the corridor of my own house like a thief, and I listened to my daughter laugh, and something in my chest that had been clenched shut for 7 years gave one slow, grinding, agonizing turn, like a key, long rusted, forced round in a lock that has not opened in a very long time. Then I went to my cold rooms, and I did not sleep, and in the morning I sent for Miss Fenwick. She came promptly in the same gray gown, her hair pinned neat again, her hands folded before her, and she waited without fidgeting for me to speak, which unsettled me, for I was accustomed to servants who filled a silence with nervous words, and she filled it with nothing at all. I gave an instruction, I said, when you arrived, regarding candles. You did, Your Grace. And yet there was a candle burning in the schoolroom at midnight. There was. She did not deny it, did not soften it, did not reach for an excuse. She simply owned it, and then she did the thing I was to learn was her particular genius. She told me the truth I had not asked for and did not wish to hear. Lady Grace is afraid of the dark, Your Grace. She has been for some time, I think a long time. She cannot sleep without a light. She lies awake in it, listening. No one has troubled to ask her why or to give her a candle, and so she has been lying awake in the dark, frightened, night after night, and telling no one because she has learned that in this house one does not trouble anyone with such things. She paused, and her gray eyes met mine and did not drop. I would rather she slept with a light and lived, than sat in the dark to satisfy a rule. If the household cannot spare the candles, I'll buy them from my own wages. The impertinence of it, the plain, unanswerable, devastating rightness of it. I who had frozen an entire house in the name of a woman who had loved light and warmth above all the things of the earth, was being informed, gently, by a penniless girl I had hired the day before, that my grief had left my own child alone in the dark, afraid, night after night, and that I had not known it, because I had never troubled to ask. I was her father, and a stranger had learned in one evening what I had not learned in 7 years, because the stranger had bothered to look. Keep your wages, I said. It came out rougher than I intended. Roughness was the only armor I had left. Burn what candles the child needs. Burn the whole cellar of them if it keeps her from fear. That will be all. She curtsied and went, and I sat a long while afterward staring at nothing, and I could not have told you whether the thing turning over in my chest was anger or shame or something older and warmer than either, something I had thought frozen past all thawing. It was the first thing I had given anyone in 7 years, leave to burn a candle. I told myself it meant nothing. It was the beginning of everything. I will not pretend the thaw was swift, because it was not, and I fought it every inch. A man does not surrender in a day the winter he has spent 7 years perfecting. I fought her the way a drowning man fights the arm that reaches for him, blindly, and against his own good, because the ice, at least, I understood. The ice had never asked anything of me. The ice let me feel nothing, and feeling nothing was the only mercy I believed the world still owed me. And here was this quiet, immovable young woman carrying warmth into my house one small defiance at a time, and each defiance asked me to feel something, and feeling was the very thing I had built my whole frozen life to avoid. But she was patient. I have never in my life met such patience, and I have thought hard about what it was made of, because it was not the timid patience of a servant who dares not object. It was the patience of someone who has decided, quietly and completely, what is right, and who is simply willing to wait, without anger and without retreat, for the rest of the world to come round to it. She did not argue with me. She did not plead. She merely, day after day, did the kind thing and the right thing, and let me make of it what I would. She caught me out at every turn, and always so gently that I could never quite make a proper quarrel of it. The music was next. I had forbidden music in the house for 7 years. The covered pianoforte in the morning room was a shrouded monument to that ban, and I passed its door as I passed a grave. I came in one gray afternoon from the home farm, snow to my knees, half frozen and wholly out of temper, and I heard it faint from behind that door, the thin, careful, one note at a time sound of a child picking out a melody on keys that had not been touched in 7 years. I flung the door open, ready to be a tyrant. There was my daughter on the bench, the dust sheet folded neatly aside and laid over a chair, the lid raised, her small hands on the yellowed keys. And there beside her was Miss Fenwick, bent close, her own hand guiding Grace's, the two of them so absorbed that for a moment they did not see me. Then they did, and they both looked up at once with the identical expression of children caught at mischief. Even the governess, even the grave woman of 25 had it, and I stood in the doorway with the words of the tyrant ready on my tongue, and I could not say them. I could not be the man who took the music from that room a second time. I could not put out that light in my daughter's face, not to save my own frozen soul. "The instrument wants tuning," I said. My voice was not steady. "See that a man is sent for from the village." And I shut the door and walked away, and I stood in the corridor with my heart going like a smith's hammer, because behind that door I had seen Aline's hands on those same keys, 1,000 evenings of them, and for the first time in 7 years the memory had not gutted me where I stood. It had warmed me, and the warmth frightened me more than any grief ever had. I found Miss Fenwick that evening in the library. It was becoming, though neither of us had named it so, the room where we met. She came down after Grace was abed, to change a book or return one, and I was always somehow there. The winter dusk was coming down blue and cold at the tall windows, and someone, she of course, always she, had lit the fire I had not ordered, and the room was gold and living with it, the only warm room in a house of 40 cold ones. "You disobey me," I said constantly. "I do." She did not turn from the shelf where she was setting a book of songs to rights. "May I ask why?" She turned then, and there was no defiance in her face and no fear. I had ceased by then to expect fear from her, but there was, for the first time, something that looked like sorrow, and it was not sorrow for herself. It was sorrow for me. "Because I buried my father last spring," she said quietly, "and my mother the winter before that, and I have no one left in the world at all, your Grace, no brother, no sister, no living soul who is mine. And in learning to bear that, I have learned a thing about grief that I think you have not yet had the mercy to learn." She drew a breath, steadying it. "Grief does not keep them, silencing the music, darkening the house, burning the greenery, forbidding the season she loved. None of it, not 1 hour of it, keeps her the least bit nearer to you. It cannot. She is gone, and no cold you make will bring her back or hold her closer. All the cold does, all it can ever do, is keep you further from everyone who is still living and still needs you." Her voice gathered, low and certain. "Your daughter has lost her mother. And she is losing her father too, an inch at a time, every day, to a grief that has become a kind of comfort to him. A place he goes to be alone with the dead, while his living child sits outside the door in the dark, afraid. And she is 10 years old, your Grace. She is the bravest, brightest, most tender-hearted little soul I have ever had the honor to teach, and she is going out like a candle in this house, an inch a year. And I cannot, sit quietly in the cold and watch it happen to honor a woman who, from everything I am told of her, would have hated above all things on this earth to see it done in her name. No one had spoken to me so in 7 years. No one had dared. My friends, the few who still wrote, sent condolences and looked away. My servants obeyed and fled. My wife's own aunt managed only her twice-yearly duty and her careful, distant kindness. And here, in my own library, with the firelight on her plain, kind face and her voice shaking not with fear, but with the sheer effort of caring for a child who was not hers to care for, a penniless parson's daughter was telling me the truth that every soul who owed me anything had been too frightened or too indifferent to tell me. I should have dismissed her. God knows I had cause and rank enough to do it. Instead, I stood in that gold and living room, and I felt the ice give, not break, not yet, but give, the first deep crack running through a river frozen 7 winters, and I did not fall into love, not that night. I was still too cold for love. I fell into something that came before it and made it possible, a great and terrible gratitude. The gratitude of a man who has been shouting down a well for 7 years, and has, at long last, heard a living voice call back. "Eleanor," I said. Her name, my wife's name. I had not said it aloud in 7 years. I had not been able to. It had lived in me like a splinter too near the heart to touch, and now it came out of me cracked and rough, breaking in the middle like ice underfoot. Her name was Eleanor, I said again, more steadily, because I found that saying it a second time did not kill me. And you are right. She would have hated this, every hour of it. She would have hated what I have made of her house and what I have let become of our girl. I could not go on for a moment. Then, I have been a coward, Miss Fenwick. I have called it grief for 7 years, and it was cowardice, and you are the first person with the courage to say so to my face. I do not think you a coward, Your Grace, she said gently. I think you a man who loved his wife past all bearing and who has not yet found the way back to the living. There is a difference. The one is a failing, the other is only a wound. And wounds, she said, and something moved behind her steady gray eyes, wounds can be tended if a body will let them be. We stood a long while in the firelight after that, saying nothing, and it was the least alone I had been in 7 years. After that night the house began, very slowly, to come back to life, and I let it, and I performed the elaborate pretense, chiefly for my own benefit, of not knowing that I was letting it. Small things at first, and each of them a quiet trespass on my 7-year ban, and each of them met by me with a studied, deliberate blindness. A single sprig of holly appeared on the schoolroom mantel one morning, its berries bright as drops of blood against the dark leaves, and I passed the open door and saw it and said nothing, and it stayed. The one candle in Grace's room became 2, and then 3, until her stretch of the upper corridor was no longer a black tunnel a frightened child must cross to reach her bed, but a warm and flickering path. And I found that I had begun, without ever deciding to walk that path myself each night on my way to my own cold rooms, though it was well out of my way, only to see the light of it and to know my daughter slept unafraid inside. I began to hear Grace's voice more often, never yet loud, never yet the free bright chatter of the child she had been, but there, present, threading through the upper floors of the house like the first thin runnel of water moving beneath river ice at the turn of the year, and always beneath her voice or beside it, catching it and carrying it, the low, warm music of Miss Fenwick's answering. I told myself I watched all this only for Grace's sake. I was lying, and the last honest corner of me knew it, and would not let me rest in the lie. Because I had begun to watch for her. I found reasons to pass the schoolroom that I had never troubled to invent for any governess before. I lingered over the estate accounts long past the hour they were finished, my pen idle, so that I might happen to be crossing the landing when she came down of an evening. And I began, being idle and being near, to notice things a properly frozen man has no business noticing. I noticed that she darned her own stockings by the schoolroom fire when she believed herself unobserved, being far too proud to ask the household for new. I noticed that she set aside the sweetest portion of her own small supper each night, the fruit, the bit of good bread, and carried it up to Grace, so that the child had 2 suppers, and the governess something less than 1. I noticed that when she laughed, which she did more now as the house thawed, as though her own guard were coming down alongside mine, she laughed with the whole of her plain, open face, holding nothing back, and that it made her in that moment briefly and undeniably lovely, in a way no drawing-room beauty had ever struck me. And I noticed, I could not stop noticing, that she was cold, always cold. That thin gray gown was the only one she had, worn to gauze at the cuffs and hem, and the North Moors in deep winter are no place for gauze, and she went about my great draughty house shivering and never once, not one single time, complained of it. That last observation was the one that undid something in me, past all my careful mending. One bitter morning, without letting myself think too hard on what I was doing or why, I sent a man to the village and had a length of good wool brought back to the house, deep green, the exact green of the holly berries leaves on the schoolroom mantel, chosen with a care I did not examine, and I gave it to Mrs. Hartley with instruction that Miss Fenwick was to have a warm gown made up from it at once, at my expense, as befit a member of my household who must go about a cold house in my service. I did not sign the order. I did not want thanks, and I did not want to look too closely, even to myself, at why I should care so much that one shivering governess be warm. I wanted only that she should not be cold. That was all. I told myself that was all. She found me out, of course. She always did. She came to me in the library that evening, our room by then, though we still had the grace not to call it so, and she stood in the doorway in that same threadbare gray, holding the bolt of green wool folded across both arms like something far too fine and far too dear to belong to her. "I cannot accept this, Your Grace." "It is a household expense," I said. "Mrs. Hartley." "Mrs. Hartley," she said, with the ghost of a smile, "cannot match green wool to the leaves of holly berries by chance, Your Grace. No housekeeper alive is so particular." And there was color rising in her plain face that owed nothing at all to the cold. "It is a kindness, and it is yours, and I know it is yours, and I am more grateful for it than I have any words to tell you. But a governess who accepts fine gowns from the master of the house she serves invites a kind of talk that follows a woman the rest of her days, through every house she after serves in, into every reference she is given, to the very end of her working life. And I have nothing in this whole wide world, Your Grace. No family, no fortune, no place that is mine. I have only my good name, and my good name is the single thing that stands between me and the poorhouse, and I cannot spend it, not even for the warmest gown that was ever woven." She hesitated, and then she gave me, as she always gave me, more truth than I had asked for. "Though I will confess, since it seems we have fallen into the habit, you and I, of telling one another the truth, that it is the kindest thing any living soul has done for me in a very long while, and I shall carry the knowing of it warm in me all my life, whether I wear the gown or no." We stood there, the whole width of that fire-lit room between us, and the far greater gulf of our 2 stations lying between us wider still. She a penniless governess, I a duke of one of the oldest houses in England, and in that moment I understood 2 things at once, with the terrible sudden clarity that comes to a man only a few times in the whole of his life. The first was that I loved her. Not gratefully now, not as a drowning man loves the arm that hauls him up, but wholly and hopelessly and past all denying, as a man loves the one person in all the world who has seen the entire truth of him, the grief and the cruelty and the cowardice and the frozen ruin he has made of his one life, and has not turned away from any of it, and has stayed, and has, God help me, set about gently tending the wound. And the second thing I understood, in the very same breath, was that I could not have her. She was a governess and I was a duke, and the world she was so carefully, so rightly guarding herself against was a real world, and a pitiless one. I knew it far better than she did. I had lived at its glittering center before I fled it. It would call her a schemer who had trapped a grieving lord in his weakness. It would call me a fool bewitched by a servant. It would make her name a byword in every drawing room from the moors to London, and it would hound her out of every respectable door for the rest of her days, and no reference and no protest of mine would save her from it, because the world does not forgive a poor woman for being loved by a rich man. It only punishes her for it. Her good name was all she had. She had told me so herself, standing there with the green wool in her arms, refusing the one warm thing in her cold life to keep it whole. And I found this was the strangest and most painful discovery of all, and it told me more surely than anything else how far the ice in me had cracked, that I loved her far too well to spend her good name for the comfort of my own heart. "Keep the wool," I said, and it came out harsh because harshness was the last shelter I had. "Burn it, sell it, do with it whatever you please, but you will not go cold in my house while you serve my child. That is not kindness. That is a duty I owe any servant under my roof, and you'll not deny me the discharging of it." And I turned and left the room before I could say the thing I had no right in the world to say, before I could ask her to stay, to be more than a governess, to let me love her openly and damn the whole sneering world. And I went out through the side door into the black and freezing night without a coat, and I walked the snow-covered terrace until my hands and face had gone numb, and I let the cold have me, because the cold, at least, I had always understood, and the cold asked nothing of me. And the cold could not break my heart, having already frozen it once and for all 7 years before. Except that it had not, that was the whole trouble, it had not frozen it after all, she had seen to that. It was Grace, in the end, who thought us both the rest of the way, my daughter, 10 years old, who had lost her mother and been half losing her father ever since, and who saw, as children always see, straight through to the thing the grown people around her were breaking their hearts to hide. The days had drawn down toward the solstice, the shortest and blackest of the year, and the whole county lay locked under snow, the roads to the village nearly closed, the moors a single white silence to every horizon. And though I had spoken no word to lift my 7-year ban, though Christmas was still, officially, a forbidden thing in the Duke of Wolvermere's house, the house had quietly, tenderly, one small trespass at a time, disobeyed its master into something very near to life. There was holly on the mantels, there was music in the mornings, there were candles in the corridors, and once, I was almost sure, in a window, and I saw all of it, and I said nothing, and I let it be. And then, 4 days before Christmas, my daughter came to find me in my study. She came of her own accord, which she had not done in years, had not done, that I could recall, since she was small enough to be carried. She stood in the doorway of that dark room and twisted her small hands together in front of her, gathering her courage the way I had watched her governess teach her to gather it, and she looked up at me with her mother's gray eyes set in her own grave little face, and she spoke. "Papa," she said, my title from her had always been Your Grace, cool and careful, the address of a servant. This was Papa. "Papa, I have been practicing something, a carol, the Christmas carol, the one Miss Fenwick has been teaching me. I can sing it now all the way through without once stopping or losing the tune." She swallowed hard. "Mama used to sing it. Miss Fenwick says you would know it, that you would remember it well. And I have practiced it so many times, Papa, and I should so very much like for you to hear me sing it, if Christmas is allowed." Her small chin came up, though her voice trembled. "Is Christmas allowed, Papa? Only I have never known. No one ever told me why it stopped, and I should like to know, please, before I hope for it, whether Christmas is allowed." I will not tell you that I answered her at once, because I did not. I could not. I sat there behind my great dark desk, the sorrowing Duke of Wolvermere, feared across 3 counties, master of 10,000 acres and 40 cold rooms, and I could not force a single word past the thing that had risen up and closed my throat. Because my daughter had just come to me, alone, on her own small courage, and asked me for permission to be joyful. She had lived 10 years in a house where joy was forbidden, and she did not even know why, only that it was, and she had grown up so careful, so grave, so certain that happiness was a thing that must be asked leave for, that she could not so much as hope for a Christmas carol without first coming to beg her father's leave to hope. And in her small trembling face, in the courage it cost her, in the very fact that she had had to ask, I understood, all at once and all the way down to the floor of my soul, exactly what I had done. I had not honored Alina these 7 years. I had told myself I honored her. It was the whole justification of my winter. But I had not. I had hidden behind her. I had taken my grief and built it into a high cold wall, and I had climbed inside that wall to be alone with the dead where nothing living could reach me. And I had put my living child on the outside of it, in the cold and the dark, and I had called the whole cruel edifice love. Alina had loved Christmas because Alina loved life, the warmth and the gathering and the giving and the light in the dark, the whole brave human insistence on joy in the teeth of the year's coldest hour. And I had murdered every last thing she loved and carved her name over the grave of it, and I had let it starve the one piece of her that was left living in the world, our girl. Yes, I said, when at last I could speak and my voice was not steady, and I did not care that it was not, and I did not trouble to hide from my child that her father was weeping. Yes, Grace, Christmas is allowed. Christmas is my darling girl. Christmas is very much allowed, and it has been wrong of me, deeply and terribly wrong of me, that you ever had to ask. I stopped it because I was so sad about your mother that I forgot I still had you, and that was the greatest mistake of my whole life, and I am more sorry for it than I will ever find the words to tell you. I came round the desk and I knelt down in front of her, so that we were eye to eye. And I should like above every other thing in this world to hear you sing your mother's carol. Will you sing it for me? And my daughter looked at me, really looked at me, the shutter that had been down for 7 years lifting at last, the light of her pouring out, and she smiled. Not the careful, wary half-smile she had learned to give the servants and her father. A true smile, whole and radiant, Alina's own smile, the one I had thought gone from the earth forever. And in that instant I understood the last thing I needed to understand, the thing all the winter had blinded me to, that I had not after all lost Alina. She was there. She had been there the whole time, in the child, in the gray eyes, in the smile, in the music, in the very courage it had taken Grace to walk into the dark study and ask her frozen father for Christmas. Alina had never left this house. She had lived on in our daughter the whole 7 years. I had simply been too deep inside my wall of cold to see her. Then Grace threw her arms around my neck, and I held her. I had not held my child in years, and over her small, warm shoulder I saw, in the doorway, Miss Fenwick. She had come to find her charge and had stopped there, unwilling to intrude, one hand against the door frame, and she was weeping too, silent tears running down her plain, kind face, and she was smiling at the two of us with such a look of joy and of exhausted relief that I knew past all doubting. What it had cost her, this quiet, patient warming of a frozen house, and that she had done it not for wages, nor for advancement, nor for any hope of gain, but for the love of a grave, silent child she had known but a matter of weeks, because that was the kind of woman she was, and because there was in her a warmth so deep and so stubborn that not even Wolvermere's 7-year winter had been able to put it out. On Christmas Eve, Wolvermere kept Christmas for the first time in 7 years. I gave the order that morning, and the house, which had been holding its breath, I think, for weeks, waiting only for its master's leave, erupted into a joy so long dammed up that the force of its breaking frightened me. Servants I had thought long past feeling wept openly as they hauled the greenery in from the cold storehouses where it had been quietly, hopefully cut, and set by ready these 3 days past. The great hearth in the hall, cold and black these 7 winters, was swept and laid and lit, and its fire climbed roaring up the chimney as though glad to be let live again. The long gallery was hung with holly and ivy and trailing bay, and someone set oranges studded with clove in bowls along the tables, and by dusk the whole vast hall smelled once more of pine and beeswax and clove and orange, smelled, that is to say, of Alina, of every Christmas she had made, and the smell of it did not gut me now. It welcomed me home. Word had gone down to the village on the morning's clearing roads, and at dusk the tenants came, up through the snow as their fathers and grandfathers had come, half in disbelief. Some of the old ones with tears standing in their eyes to see the doors of Wolvermere thrown open, and the great hall ablaze once more after 7 black years. They filled the hall, cottager and farmer and shepherd and their wives and their broods of children. And there was ale and there was roast and there was firelight. And there were the old songs raised up rough and hearty to the smoke-dark rafters. And I stood among my own people for the first time in 7 years, and was ashamed of every one of those years and glad past speaking to have them ended. But the moment I have kept, the moment I carry still, and will carry to my grave, and would not trade for the crown of England, was not the feast for all its warmth. It came earlier, in the blue and quiet hour just before the tenants arrived, in the morning room, where the pianoforte stood uncovered at last, its lid raised, newly tuned, waiting. Miss Fenwick sat at the keys. She played, I learned that evening, played beautifully, with a true and tender hand, and had never once in all those weeks let me know it, had guided my daughter note by patient note, and never played a bar herself in my hearing, out of what care or what modesty I could only guess. And my daughter stood in the curve of the great instrument in a white dress with holly pinned at the waist, her face solemn and shining, and when Miss Fenwick played the opening bars, the old carol, Eleanor's carol, the one she had sung every Christmas Eve of our marriage in that very room, my daughter drew a breath, and she sang. She sang it all the way through, without stopping, without once losing the tune, in a clear, high, true child's voice that filled the room to its corners and spilled out through the open door, and went singing down the corridors of that great thawing house like light poured into every dark place at once. She sang her mother's carol in her mother's room in her mother's voice, and I stood in the doorway. I, who had listened at doorways for 7 years, too much the coward ever to go in. And this time I went in. I crossed the room and I sat down, and I let my daughter's voice pour over me and through me like the first sun of the year over broken ice, and I wept openly, without shame, before the child and the governess and God Almighty, and the tears were not the tears of grief. They were the other kind. The kind a man weeps when the long winter breaks at last, and the ice groans and gives, and deep beneath it, where he had thought all life stopped forever, he hears the river moving once again. When the last clear note faded into the firelit quiet, Grace ran to me and flung her arms about my neck, and I gathered her up, and over the top of her bright bent head I looked across the room at Clara Fenwick, still seated at the keys, her hands gone still, her own eyes brimming, her plain and dear and beloved face lit gold by the very candles she had lit against my every order the first night she came into my house. And I knew, with a certainty past all the arguments of the world, that whatever it cost me, whatever the drawing-room said, whatever names they made of us, I could not let this woman walk out of my house and back into the cold alone. I had given her nothing in all these weeks. A bolt of green wool she would not keep, for the sake of her good name. And she had given me back my daughter, and my house, and my dead wife's memory turned from an open wound into a blessing I could carry, and my own frozen, thawing, foolish, living heart. I found her afterward, when the last of the tenants had gone singing home through the snow and Grace was asleep at last in her warm room with 3 candles burning steady, and not one shadow of fear in her small face. I found Clara in the library, our room, standing by the fire she had lit, and I saw at once, from the set of her shoulders and the way she would not turn to face me, that she was steeling herself to say good-bye. Because she was too honorable to remain in the house of a man she knew loved her, when nothing honorable could come of the staying. Because she would rather go back alone into the cold than let one breath of scandal touch the child she had saved, or the house she had thawed. I have engaged a new position, she said before I could speak, her eyes fixed on the fire. In the south near Bath, a merchant's family, most respectable, 3 little girls. I am to go to them in the spring. She kept her voice very level, and it cost her. I could hear what it cost her. Lady Grace is well now, your Grace. She is warm and she is brave and she sings and she has her father back, truly back, which is more than any governess could have prayed to give her. She does not need me any longer, and I think it is best, for the sake of this house and of her good name and of yours, that I go now in the spring. Before her voice failed her. She mastered it as she mastered everything. Before I am the cause of any talk that might harm what we have mended here. You know why I must go. You know it better than I do. You told me yourself without a word the night of the green wool. I know why you believe you must, I said. I have believed it too. I have believed it for weeks, and it is why I have said nothing, though it has near killed me to say nothing. But I find I cannot let you go on believing it, because I have learned better and you were the one who taught me. I crossed the room to her. Clara, turn round, look at me. She turned, and her steady gray eyes were not steady now. They were full and afraid, the first fear I had ever seen in her, and it was not fear of me but fear of hopping. I spent 7 years, I said, keeping a woman I loved by turning my house into a tomb. And it did not keep her. It never could have kept her. All it did was freeze everyone still living inside it, my servants, my tenants, and a little girl who was afraid of the dark and had no one to bring her a candle, and a father too far lost in the comfort of his own grief to be that someone. You told me all of that the first week you came, and every word of it was true, and it saved my daughter's life and very likely mine. And now I am going to tell you something true that you taught me and have not yet learned yourself. I took both her cold hands in both of mine, and this time I did not let go. The way to honor love is not to wall it up with the dead. It is to let the light back in, and to love the living, and to be brave enough, Clara, to be happy again. You said grief must not keep us from everyone still living who needs us. Well, I am still living, and I need you, not as my daughter's governess, as a man who was frozen through for 7 years and is not frozen any longer, and is not, only and entirely because of you. She had begun to weep, silently, the tears sliding down without her seeming to feel them, and she did not pull her hands from mine. Let the world say what it will, I said. Let it call me a fool and you a schemer. It will be lying on both counts, and I have done with ordering my life by the opinion of a world I fled 7 years ago and do not miss. I am done being ruled by the cold, Clara, and I am done being ruled by fear, and I will not spend one more winter under a roof that has your warmth in it every single day and does not let me tell you plainly that I love you, because I do. I have loved you, I think, since the first night when you lit a candle against my every order because a frightened child needed one and looked me in the eye and did not flinch. I drew a breath of my own. Stay, not as a servant. Marry me. Be Grace's mother, who has been more a mother to her these 2 months than anyone since Eleanor. Be my wife. Be cold no more, not one more day of your life. And let there be Christmas here, real Christmas, and music, and candles in every window against the dark, every year, for all the rest of our lives together. She wept then in good earnest, and she laughed through the weeping, that plain and open laugh that made her lovely, the laugh that held nothing back, and she said yes. She said it the way she had done everything from the first hour she stepped shivering into my hall, quietly, and without one instant's flinching, her cold hand turning to curl warm and sure around mine. And outside the tall windows the snow came down soft and endless over the moors, and inside every candle in Wolvermere burned steady and gold, and the great house that had been a tomb for 7 long winters became, in that fire-lit hour and forever after, a home. That was many years ago now. Grace is grown and married and mistress of a good house 2 valleys east, and she has daughters of her own, 3 of them, bright and loud and utterly without fear of the dark, who descend upon Wolvermere every Christmas and fill these old halls with such an unholy racket of singing and shrieking and small feet on the stairs that I can scarcely hear myself think from Advent to Twelfth Night. And I would not silence one moment of it. I have had my fill and more of a silent house. Let it ring. And Clara, my wife, the penniless parson's daughter the whole wide world overlooked, whom I very nearly let walk out of my door and back into the cold to keep from spending her good name. Clara winds the greenery along the banisters every Advent with her own hands, holly and ivy and trailing bay, until the whole hall smells of pine and beeswax and oranges studded with clove. And every evening of the darkest week of the year, she goes from window to window through the house, and she sets a candle burning in each one against the night. She lit the first one the very night she came, against my every order, because a child was afraid of the dark. She has never once in all the years since let it go out. And that I have come at the long last to believe is the truest thing I know of love in this world. Not that it keeps the dead, it cannot. Nothing can, but that it dares to warm the living. That it is brave enough in the deepest and the coldest and the darkest hour of all the turning year to strike a small light and to shelter it and to keep it burning against everything. And to say, quietly, and without one instant's flinching, in the very teeth of all the sorrow of the world, "There will be Christmas here,